Means whenever you are executing any transaction or any report, how the authorization checks are processed, what are all the steps involved to check whether you are authorized or whether the specific user is authorized to execute the particular transaction. Okay, this slide it explains authorization checks at transaction start. So for example, here, what the user is trying to do is trying to execute the transaction VA01. That VA01 is the transaction code to create sales order. So let's assume the user is trying to execute the transaction code VA01. As soon as the user execute the transaction VA01, it will check the authorization object S underscore T code, which is VA01. S underscore T code is an authorization object. VA01 is the value. The field is TCD. We have seen it before. The TCD transaction code field, the value is VA01. It will check this. This is a standard authorization object which is required for all the transaction code. So where this will check? This is also quite important. So as soon as the user logs in, the SAP loads all the available authorization object for the specific user to the user buffer. This is quite important to understand. So it is loading all the available authorization object for this user while logging into SAP system. That is the reason what we say whenever you fix any issue, or let's say you added some additional authorization, we always ask the user to log off and log in so that the SAP can load the user buffer. However, in the recent latest SAP, you don't need to log off. Actually, you can simply type in /n and it will automatically load the user buffer. So this is user buffer. This is quite important to understand. This is also one of the main reasons that we say that don't add unnecessary authorization to user, because as soon as the user logs in, then the user is trying to get all the authorization which is available, that the SAP will load all the authorization objects which are available to the user buffer. The end, the user buffer is filled up with all the authorization data. So you have less free memory for other activities. So that's the reason we do that. Okay. So anyway, in the first step, that SAP is checking this object. Let's assume this object is available, then it will go to the next step. If suppose this S underscore transaction code VA01 is not available, then it will stop the transaction. When it stops the transaction, it will say you are not authorized to do this specific transaction. So let's assume if the user have VA01, then it will go to the next one. Next one is V underscore VBAK underscore VKO. So this is an authorization checks which is mandatory to execute VA01. So here we have different fields, that is activity SPARK, VKOR, that is sales organization, sales area, and all these things is already available in this particular authorization object. So it is going to check, after checking this one, it is going to check all other mandatory authorization which is required to execute this particular transaction, VA01. Okay, so then it will also check what all the field and the field values. Let's say if you are executing the VA01 for one specific sales organization, then it will going to check whether you are authorized for specific sales organization. That's what it's going to check. So it will going to check all the authorization object which is assigned to the user. Or let's say it will check all the mandatory authorization which is assigned to the user in this specific state. Why? Because if let's say we can also switch from one transaction to another transaction code, yeah, we'll come to that again. Let's assume this transaction code, all the authorization available, then it will going to execute the above program which is required to complete this present VA01 transaction. If let's say we are switching from VA01 to other transaction, so let's say for example we are going to create a delivery note in that case. Yeah, that's another transaction code. There is buttons available in sales order screen. You click the delivery note, it will take you to that specific transaction code. Then you need to have authorization for that specific transaction code and that specific programs. So it's going to start checking it again. Okay, that's the reason I said here it's going to check only the mandatory authorization which is required for VA01. So each step it is going to check authorization whether you are allowed to do this authorization or not. Here you can see authorization check within the program, how it is going to execute or how SAP is executing the authorization checks within the program itself. Here we are taking the example of transaction code VB01. The program which is related to VB01 is this program, SAP MF05L. So whenever you execute the transaction code VB01, so this is the program SAP is trying to execute. Okay, so inside the program, you have a statement like this: authority check object F underscore BKPF underscore BUK, activity is field 02 and BUKRS field is BUK. So activity 02 is means change, that FB02 is change document, and BUKRS is company code, and BUK is the value of this company code. Let's say here we are trying to access the document of company code 1000, then 1000 should be there. You can see it here. It's reading from the user buffer. So as soon as it executes this statement, it's going to the end user authorization, and let's say end user authorization what we need here, it's going to check in the user buffer. User buffer have already authorization. Let's assume activity 02 and 03 and BUKRS is 1000. In that case, it is going to execute or it is going to pass this one and go to the next statement. If this is passed, then it will go to if condition any 0 means the message type that user have authorization, then it will execute for the specific country code. Means that 0 means user have all the correct authorization. When you have many messages like this, 04 means the user have authorization, but the values are different. The maybe the company code is different. If let's say user the error message is 12, then user does not have any authorization object. If it is 16, then no profile is entered with the master data. Like this, we have different messages. We will also see that in the tracing how this is going to work, and you can see exactly how the messages are being given back to the program. Next, we are going to see the user buffer. We talked about this user buffer previous slide. Let's say this user have this specific role. So from the role, we are getting a profile. So from the role, we are generating the profile. In turn, the profile are assigned to the users. Okay. So once the profile is assigned to the user, then you can see here authorizations and the objects related to the authorization will be assigned to the user. So it is very important to know how the user buffer is being executed. We need to use the user buffer in a very productive way that don't fill up the user buffer with all the unnecessary authorization objects. Say the user does not require this authorization, please remove it. Then you can have a effective user buffer which is really used by the user. The transaction code to see the user buffer is SU53. It will give all the authorization object which is available in the user buffer. We can check the transaction code SU53 in our system. Let's go to our system. So let's log into our system PRD. Log into the client 800 and use the user mark. Okay, now we are in the user mark. Let's execute the transaction SU56. Now you can see this is reading text. I mean, it's reading something from the user buffer, and it should display all the available profiles and the authorization objects. Okay, now we got the detail. This is for user mark, this is a system, this date, and which instance, an authorization object, and what time. All this information available. You can see this is the object class and object. Then let's take one object. Let's take this object. Object class material management purchasing. Let's open this and you can see this is the authorization. We have the name of the authorization. You open this, then you can see this is from the profile. This is the profile and this is the role. And this is the field, activity, and field value. Yeah. Field value, field, role, profile, authorization, object, then object class. We can drill down and see all the authorization which is available for this user. So this will become very useful when you want to analyze what the user already having. So let's say you wanted to find out what are all the authorization objects available with this user. You can ask the user to execute the transaction code SU56, ask the user to download this as a file and send it to you. Then you can analyze this output to find out what is actually the user is having, what is in the user buffer. This will be quite useful to identify some issues or some authorization issues or to analyze some authorization issues. With this, we are coming to the end of this particular session. Thank you very much for listening. I will see you in the next session. Bye-bye.